Nobody laughed louder than the Orally ambassador when the human scientist finished her presentation. The conference hall held representatives from over 300 species, and most of them were either laughing or shaking their heads. A few were already walking out. Dr. Roa Messi stood alone at the podium, her slides still glowing behind her, and waited for the noise to die down. It did not die down. The Galactic Concorde had just lost its 14th fleet to the Hollow. 40 million dead across 3 inhabited moons at the Battle of Ossa Reach. Every advanced weapon in the combined arsenal of 300 civilizations had failed. Energy shields phased through the enemy like light through smoke. Plasma bolts were absorbed. Graviton warheads passed through the Hollow without making contact at all. The most powerful military alliance in galactic history was losing a war it could not even fight, and now a human was standing in front of them suggesting that the answer was metal slugs. Roa kept her voice steady. She explained her theory one more time. The Hollow existed in a state of shifted matter. They sat slightly outside normal physical reality, which was why energy-based weapons could not touch them. Energy was too refined, too advanced, too high on the interaction spectrum. But crude physical objects, simple mass moving at simple speed, existed at a low enough threshold to make contact. A bullet, a chunk of tungsten, a piece of shrapnel. These things were real enough, solid enough, and dumb enough to hit something that the smartest weapons in the galaxy could not. Ambassador Wingello of the Orally leaned into his microphone. He was tall and thin, with 4 arms and skin that glowed a soft blue when he was annoyed. Right now, he was very blue. He called the theory caveman logic. He asked if the humans also planned to throw rocks. The hall laughed again. Roa said nothing. She had expected this. But in the back row, Fleet Admiral Daroash was not laughing. He was a Paulenni, short and armored, with a body that looked like a bipedal pangolin. He had commanded the 9th Fleet at Ossa Reach and watched 6,000 of his own people die in ships that could not fire a single effective shot. He had nightmares about it every night, and he was desperate enough to listen to a human. After the session ended, Ush found Roa in a corridor. He asked her how confident she was. She said 70%. He asked what happened in the other 30%. She said the test subjects would die. He asked if she had a ship in mind. She did point. 3 days later, a classified order reached a human frigate called the Rough Hand, docked at a refueling station on the edge of Concorde space. The order was simple. Jump to the Hollow-infested Vera system. Engage the enemy with kinetic weapons. Record everything. Transmit data before destruction. Captain D. Okoro read the order twice. She was from Lagos, Earth. 38 years old. 17 years in the human fleet. She had a scar across her jaw from a bar fight. She had one, and a reputation for staying calm in situations that made other people scream. She understood exactly what the order meant. The Concorde expected her and her crew to die. The mission was a sacrifice wrapped in paperwork. They were not soldiers to the Concorde. They were a lab experiment. She called her senior officers to the bridge. Lieutenant Pal Soren, her weapons officer, read the briefing and whistled low through his teeth. Sergeant Reed Tanaka, who led the Marine squad, read it and said nothing at all, which was worse. Dot Okoro told them the truth. The Concorde thought human weapons were junk. The Concorde thought humans were primitive. And the Concorde was sending them into a kill zone because nobody would miss them if they did not come back. Then she told them something else. She said that human scientists had figured out something that 300 advanced species could not. She said there was a real chance, a 70% chance, that their weapons could actually hurt the Hollow. Not plasma cannons, not graviton bombs. Their weapons. The magnetic accelerator guns that fired tungsten slugs. The fragmentation rockets. The grape-shot canisters that filled a space with 10,000 pieces of metal. The things every other species in the galaxy called primitive, Soren grinned. He was from a mining colony near Saturn, and he loved his guns the way some people love their children. Tanaka checked the edge of her combat knife. She had named it Apology. Okoro looked at her crew. 44 humans on a steel ship with metal bullets, heading into a system full of things that had eaten 14 fleets. She said, they need somebody dumb enough to walk into the dark. Lucky for them, that is what we do. Nobody argued. Nobody asked to stay behind. The next morning, Ambassador Gello arrived at the docking port with a single bag and a recording device. The Concorde had assigned him as an observer for Experiment 77. His job was to document the results. He expected to be documenting a funeral. He stepped aboard the Rough Hand and looked around at the narrow corridors, the steel walls, the ammunition crates stacked in every corner. There was no energy shielding, no plasma turrets, no artificial gravity plating on half the decks. The ship smelled like engine grease and gunpowder. Gello sent a private message to his family. He told them he loved them. He did not expect to send another. The Rough Hand undocked, turned toward the dark, and jumped. The first thing Ambassador Gello noticed about the humans was that they touched their weapons constantly. Not firing them, not cleaning them, just touching them. A hand resting on a sidearm while eating breakfast. Fingers brushing a rifle barrel while walking down a corridor. Sergeant Tanaka had her knife on the table during every meal, blade facing outward, like it was another member of the crew. Gello had studied hundreds of species during his career. He had never seen one that treated its weapons like companions. The Rough Hand was 3 days out from the Vera system. Gello used the time to inspect the ship and record his observations for the Concorde. Every hour he found something new that horrified him. The weapons bay was the worst. Lieutenant Soren walked him through it with the pride of a man showing off his home. The main armament was a pair of magnetic accelerator cannons mounted on the ship's spine. They fired tungsten slugs the size of a human forearm at 3 kilometers per second. No energy signature, no plasma charge, just a heavy piece of metal moving very fast. Soren explained that at those speeds, a tungsten slug carried more destructive energy than most plasma bolts. Gello asked how that was possible. Soren said mass times velocity squared divided by 2. Simple math. The universe did not care how advanced you were. Physics was physics. Below the main guns were racks of fragmentation rockets. Each rocket carried a warhead packed with steel fragments. On detonation, it threw a cloud of razor-sharp metal in every direction. Soren called it area denial. Gello called it barbaric. Soren shrugged and said barbaric was fine as long as it worked. Then there were the grape shot canisters. Gello had to ask Soren to explain them 3 times because he could not believe what he was hearing. A grape shot canister was a shell packed with 10,000 small metal balls. When fired, the canister burst open and the balls spread out in a wide cone. Anything in that cone was shredded. It was a weapon designed not to hit a target, but to fill an entire area with so much metal that nothing inside could survive. Gello asked why any species would design such a thing. Soren said humans have been using grape shot for over 1,000 years. It was originally fired from cannons on sailing ships on Earth's oceans. Gello did not know what a sailing ship was. Soren explained it. Gello wished he had not asked. The marine armory was smaller, but no less disturbing. Tanaka showed him the ballistic rifles, the shotguns, the sidearms, and the cases of ammunition. Everything fired physical projectiles: lead, steel, tungsten, copper. The shotguns fired clusters of heavy pellets at close range. The rifles fired single rounds at long range. The sidearms were backup weapons for when the rifles failed. Gello asked what happened when the sidearms also failed. Tanaka held up her knife. He recorded everything. He measured the ammunition. He weighed the slugs. He filmed the crew loading rounds into magazines by hand, one at a time, metal clicking against metal. He watched Tanaka's Marines run combat drills in the cargo bay, moving through tight spaces with their rifles up, practicing room-clearing techniques that involve kicking doors and throwing small explosive charges around corners. These people did not fight like any species Gello had ever seen. Every other civilization in the Concorde fought at a distance. Ships fired energy weapons across thousands of kilometers. Ground troops used drones and automated systems. Nobody got close. Nobody touched the enemy. Humans got close. Their entire approach to war was built around closing distance and hitting things with as much physical force as possible. Their history was full of it. Soren told him about trench warfare, about bayonet charges, about soldiers fighting hand-to-hand in the mud. Gello thought he was exaggerating. Soren showed him the historical records. He was not out on a second evening. Gello sat in the mess hall and watched Captain Okoro eat dinner with her crew. She sat at the same table as everyone else. She made jokes. She listened when people talked. A young engineer told a story about his dog back on Earth, and Okoro laughed hard enough to spill her drink. There was no separation between the captain and the crew. They were a family that happened to carry guns. Gello tried to write an objective report about the Rough Hands' combat capabilities. He ended up writing 3 paragraphs about how the ship smelled like metal and how the crew smiled too easily for people heading toward death. On the third morning, Dr. Roa Messi briefed the full crew in the cargo bay. She explained the hollow one more time. Phase-shifted matter. Energy weapons pass through. Physical weapons might not. She was honest about the uncertainty. 70% chance the theory was right. 30% chance they were about to die for nothing. Okoro stood next to her and watched the crew's faces. Nobody flinched. A few nodded. Tanaka was sharpening apology and did not look up. Soren asked one question. He asked if there was an upper limit on how much kinetic force the hollow could absorb. Roa said she did not know. Soren smiled and said he was looking forward to finding out. 6 hours later, the rough hand dropped out of faster-than-light travel and entered the Vera system. The sensors lit up immediately. Hollow signatures across the entire system. Massive dark shapes drifting between planets, leaving dead zones behind them like trails of poison. Gello looked at the sensor display and felt his 4 hands go cold. Okoro sat in her captain's chair, calm as stone, and said, "Soren, warm up the guns." Silence had a different weight in dead space. Gello had traveled through empty systems before, but the Vera system was not empty. It was full of something that swallowed light and sound and life, and left nothing behind but a cold that sensors could measure but not explain. The rough hand moved slowly through the outer edge of the system. Okoro had ordered minimal power output. No active scanning. No necessity signals. The ship drifted forward on momentum. Watching, through the main viewport, the crew could see them. The hollow. Massive shapes darker than the space around them, drifting between the system's planets like slow clouds made of nothing. They did not reflect starlight. They did not register on energy-based sensors. But a simple optical camera, the kind humans had been building for 500 years, showed them clearly. Dark blots against the stars. Moving. Alive. Gello's advanced instruments were useless. His scanners were designed to detect energy signatures, electromagnetic fields, quantum fluctuations. The hollow produced none of these. To his equipment, the system was empty. But when he looked out the viewport with his own eyes, he could see the shapes, and his skin dimmed to pale gray with fear. Soren sat at the weapons station, fingers resting on the firing controls. He had loaded the main accelerator cannons with tungsten slugs and had fragmentation rockets ready in the secondary tubes. The grapeshot canisters were loaded in the close-range launchers. Everything was manual. Everything was physical. There was not a single energy weapon on the entire ship. Okoro pointed at the nearest hollow entity. It was roughly the size of a Concorde destroyer, maybe 300 meters across, shapeless and shifting like smoke frozen in midair. It was drifting toward a dead moon on the edge of the system. She told Soren to track it. He locked the accelerator cannon on the target and waited. At T-400 kilometers, the hollow changed direction. It turned toward the rough hand. Slowly at first, then faster. It had noticed them. Gello's voice cracked when he spoke. He said they should retreat. He said the experiment had gathered enough data. He said they could report back that the hollow were present and let someone else test the weapons theory. Okoro did not look at him. She watched the hollow approach on the optical feed. 250 kilometers. 200. She said one sentence. Soren, put iron on target. Soren fired. The main accelerator cannon kicked hard enough to shake the entire ship. A tungsten slug, half a meter long and weighing 40 kilograms, left the barrel at 3 kilometers per second. It crossed 200 kilometers in just over a minute. There was no flash, no beam of light, no dramatic energy trail, just a piece of metal flying through the dark, aimed at something that had killed 14 fleets. The slug hit the hollow entity dead center. The effect was instant. The dark shape convulsed. A visible wound tore through its body, a jagged line of disrupted matter that spread outward from the impact point. The hollow shuddered, twisted, and made a sound. Not a sound that traveled through space, because sound cannot travel in vacuum. A frequency, a vibration that passed through the hull of the rough hand and rattled every surface on the ship. A viewport on the port side cracked from the resonance. The bridge went completely still. Soren stared at his screens. His instruments showed the impact. Physical contact confirmed. Kinetic energy transfer confirmed. Damage to target confirmed. He whispered 2 words that would be repeated across the galaxy within a week. It bleeds. Gello's 4 hands were shaking. His bioluminescent skin was flashing in patterns he could not control, shifting between shock and disbelief. His recording device captured everything. The slug, the impact, the wound, the sound, the crack in the viewport. The look on Soren's face. Okoro did not celebrate. She did not smile. She watched the hollow entity writhing in space, wounded but not dead, and she knew that one slug proving the theory was not enough. She needed to prove that human weapons could kill. She gave the order for a full broadside. Soren fired everything. Both accelerator cannons launched tungsten slugs in rapid succession. Fragmentation rockets streaked out from the secondary tubes and detonated around the hollow, filling the space with clouds of razor-sharp steel. Grapeshot canisters burst open and sent waves of metal balls tearing through the entity from multiple angles. The hollow could not absorb it. It could not phase through it. Every slug punched a hole. Every fragment cut a wound. Every ball of grapeshot ripped away another piece of its shifting body. The entity fractured, split into smaller pieces, and each piece dissolved into nothing as the barrage continued 30 seconds after the broadside began. The hollow entity was gone. The crew of the Rough Hand sat in silence for a long moment. Then someone in the back of the bridge started clapping. Then another. Then the whole bridge erupted. People were shouting, pounding on consoles, grabbing each other. Soren leaned back in his chair and laughed until his eyes were wet. Gello did not move. He stared at the empty space where the hollow had been and replayed his own recording. He watched the tungsten slug hit. He watched the creature die. He watched it happen with weapons that he had called caveman logic 4 days ago. Okoro let her crew celebrate for exactly 10 seconds. Then she called for quiet. She said that was 1. Sensors show 9 more in this system, and they just felt their friend die. So get ready, because they're going to come looking for us. The celebration stopped. The crew turned back to their stations. Magazines were reloaded. Cannons were cycled. Tanaka checked the edge of apology and headed for the armory. The dark was coming. And now it was angry. The distress signal was so faint that the communications officer almost missed it. A thin, repeating pulse buried under layers of static and interference, coming from a frozen moon called Vera, 6 on the far side of the system. Concord frequency. Palani encryption. Someone was alive out there. Okoro pulled up the system map. Between the Rough Hand and Vera, 6, there were at least 6 hollow entities. 2 of them were already moving in the ship's direction. The first kill had sent a signal through the swarm. Something had hurt one of them, and the rest wanted to find it. Gello saw the distress signal on his screen and immediately understood what Okoro was thinking. He told her no. He said the mission was to test weapons and record data, not to stage a rescue in hostile territory. He said the data they already had was worth more than any survivors on that moon. He said they should jump out now and deliver the proof to the Concord. Okoro listened to all of it. Then she said the mission changed the moment that first slug landed. They were not observers anymore. They were the only ship in this system with weapons that worked. And there were people on Vera, 6, who needed help. Gello asked her if she was willing to risk her entire crew for strangers. Okoro said that was the only reason worth risking a crew for. She pushed the Rough Hand forward, straight into the system. The next 4 hours were the longest of Gello's life. The ship fought a running battle through the Vera system, engaging hollow entities as they closed in from multiple directions. Soren fired the accelerator cannons in controlled bursts, picking targets and placing tungsten slugs with precision. Each hit punched through the dark shapes and sent them reeling. But there were more of them now, and they were learning. The hollow began spreading out, approaching from wider angles, trying to surround the ship. They could not dodge the slugs, but they could make Soren choose between targets. Okoro saw the tactic and countered it. She ordered Soren to switch to fragmentation rockets on the flanks and save the main guns for the largest threats directly ahead. The rockets were devastating. Each one detonated in a burst of steel fragments that tore through the hollow like a storm of razors. The creatures could not phase through metal. Every fragment was a wound. Soren fired rockets in pairs, creating overlapping fields of shrapnel that no hollow could cross without being shredded. But ammunition was finite. Okoro watched the counts on her display drop with every salvo. They had left port with a full load, but a full load for a human frigate was not much by galactic standards. Human ships were small. Human supply chains were short. Every slug and every rocket mattered. She told Soren to make every shot count. He said he always did. Halfway through the system, the rough hand sensors picked up something new. Smaller hollow signatures on the surface of Vera, 6 itself. Not the massive ship-sized entities they had been fighting in space, but ground-level forms. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, moving across the frozen surface of the moon, clustered around the Concord observation post where the distress signal was coming from. Okoro realized the hollow operated at multiple scales. The big ones moved through space and consumed ships and stations. The small ones moved on the ground and consumed everything else. The observation post on Vera 6 was under siege by a swarm of ground-level hollow. She called Tanaka to the bridge. Tanaka looked at the sensor data, looked at the surface images, and nodded once. She did not ask questions. She went to the armory and started waking up her Marines. Gello watched the Marines prepare and felt something between horror and amazement. They loaded ballistic rifles with armor-piercing rounds. They filled pouches with shotgun shells. They strapped explosive charges to their belts and checked the seals on their vacuum suits. Tanaka slid Apology into its sheath on her chest plate and tested the draw 3 times. These people were preparing to drop onto a frozen moon, crawling with entities that had consumed entire civilizations, and they were bringing rifles and knives. Gello asked Tanaka what the plan was if they were overwhelmed on the surface. Tanaka said the plan was to not be overwhelmed. Gello asked what happened if that plan failed. Tanaka looked at him with calm, dark eyes and said then they would make the hollow pay for every meter. The rough hand broke through the last line of space-based hollow and entered orbit around Vera 6. Below them, the frozen surface stretched out in white and gray. The observation post was a small structure half buried in ice near the moon's equator. Even from orbit, they could see the dark shapes moving around it. Dozens of ground-level hollow pressing against the walls. Try to get in. The post's thick physical walls were holding them back. Another confirmation. Brute matter stopped the hollow. Energy shields did not. But walls could only hold for so long. Okoro gave the order. 2 armored shuttles dropped from the rough hand's belly and burned toward the surface. Tanaka was in the first shuttle with 8 Marines. A second squad of 6 followed in the second shuttle, 14 humans. Rifles, shotguns, knives, and explosives dropping into a swarm. Gello connected to the helmet camera feeds and watched the shuttles descend. The frozen surface rushed up to meet them. The dark shapes scattered and then regrouped, turning toward the incoming craft. Tanaka's voice came over the radio, steady and flat. 30 seconds to contact. Weapons free on landing. Nobody stops moving until we reach that door. The shuttles hit the ground hard, ramps slamming down onto ice, and 14 humans charged into the dark. The ramp hit ice, and the shooting started before Tanaka's boots touched the ground. A ground-level hollow lunged at the shuttle opening, a flickering shape of living static the size of a large dog, and the Marine next to Tanaka put 2 shotgun blasts into it at point-blank range. The pellets tore through the thing like it was made of wet paper. It split apart, shuddered, and dissolved into nothing on the frozen surface. First ground kill confirmed. Shotguns worked. Tanaka did not pause to admire it. She was already moving, rifle up, leading her squad toward the observation post 50 meters ahead. The frozen landscape around them was crawling with hollow. They moved low and fast, dark shapes skittering across the ice, some the size of dogs, some the size of humans, a few even larger. They flickered and shifted as they moved, like shadows that had learned to walk. The Marines fired as they advanced. Short, controlled bursts from ballistic rifles. Each round that connected punched through the hollow and left a trail of dissolving matter behind it. The creatures had no tactics for this. They were used to phasing through energy barriers and absorbing plasma fire. They had never encountered anything that could simply punch holes in them with bits of metal. But there were so many of them. The second shuttle landed 30 meters to the left, and its squad poured out, forming a firing line that covered Tanaka's flank. The two squads moved in parallel toward the post, pouring rounds into the swarm. Spent casings bounced off the ice. Muzzle flashes lit up the frozen ground in sharp bursts of orange and white. A large hollow, taller than a man and shaped like something between a spider and a wave, rushed at Tanaka's squad from the right. 3 Marines turned and fired together. Rifle rounds tore through its body and it staggered, but it kept coming. Tanaka pulled a fragmentation grenade from her belt, popped the pin, and threw it. The grenade landed at the creature's base and exploded in a burst of steel fragments. The hollow came apart like smoke in a strong wind. Gello watched all of this from the rough hand through the helmet camera feeds. His 4 hands gripped the edges of the console so hard his fingers ached. He was watching humans fight cosmic entities with bullets and grenades on a frozen moon, and the humans were winning. The Marines reached the observation post door. It was sealed from inside, thick steel, dented and scratched where the hollow had been pressing against it. Tanaka banged on it with the butt of her rifle and shouted the Concorde emergency hail. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then the locks clicked and the door cracked open. A Paolini face appeared in the gap. Small, armored, wide-eyed with terror. Behind that face were 10 more. 11 Paolini survivors, huddled inside the post, alive because the physical walls had kept the hollow out. Tanaka told them to stay close and stay low. The Marines formed a circle around the survivors and began moving back toward the shuttles. The hollow swarm had regrouped and was closing in from all sides now. The creatures were faster on the ground than Tanaka had expected. They flowed across the ice like liquid shadow. The Marines walked backward, firing in every direction. Magazines ran dry and were swapped in seconds. A Marine named Cho took a hit from a small hollow that got too close, the thing latching onto his arm and burning through the outer layer of his suit before his partner blasted it off with a shotgun. Cho kept firing with his other hand. Tanaka ran dry on rifle ammunition 20 meters from the shuttles. She dropped the rifle on its sling, pulled her sidearm, and kept shooting. A ground hollow lunged at one of the Paolini survivors, and Tanaka stepped between them, fired 2 rounds into the creature's center mass, and kicked the dissolving remains away from the group. 10 meters from the shuttles. A wave of hollow surged from the left. More than the Marines could shoot fast enough. 3 of them reached the group. A Marine went down, tackled by a flickering shape. His squad mate stomped on the creature and fired point blank into it. Another hollow grabbed at Tanaka's leg. She drew apology and slashed downward in a single clean stroke. The knife cut through the hollow like it was cutting silk. The thing fell apart. Gello saw it happen on the camera feed. A human on a frozen moon, killing an entity from beyond normal space with a combat knife. He would remember that image for the rest of his life. The Marines loaded the survivors into the shuttles. Tanaka was the last one up the ramp. She stood at the opening and fired her last 3 sidearm rounds into the approaching swarm, then slammed the ramp control and the shuttle sealed. Both shuttles lifted off, burning hard for orbit. Below them, the surface of Vera, 6 swarmed with dark shapes reaching upward like a living stain in orbit. The rough hand was barely holding together. Soren had been fighting alone for 30 minutes, keeping the space base hollow at bay while the ground operation played out. 2 gun turrets had burned out from overuse. The hull was dented in a dozen places. Ammunition was critically low. The shuttles docked hard and fast. Okoro did not wait for them to fully seal before giving the order to jump. The Rough Hand's engine screamed as the ship tore a hole in normal space and hurled itself out of the Vera system. Behind them, a hollow entity the size of a small moon drifted into the space they had just left. If they had waited 10 more seconds, there would have been nothing left to find. The Rough Hand was gone, battered, bleeding, low on everything, but carrying 11 survivors, a full data recording, and proof that the galaxy's most feared enemy could be killed with iron and stubbornness. The footage arrived at Concord Central Command 6 hours before the Rough Hand did. Gello had transmitted the raw data ahead of the ship, every second of helmet camera recordings, every sensor reading, every weapons log. He sent it without commentary. He did not need to add any. The footage spoke for itself. Admiral Ush was the first to watch it. He sat alone in his office, a small Palanese behind a large desk, and played the recordings from the beginning. He watched the first tungsten slug hit the hollow. He watched the creature convulse and bleed. He watched the broadside that killed it. He watched the running battle through the Vera system. He watched 14 Marines drop onto a frozen moon and fight through a swarm with rifles and knives. He watched Tanaka slash a hollow apart with a blade. He watched 11 of his own people, 11 Palanese, walk out of the shuttle alive because humans had come for them. When the footage ended, Ush sat in silence for a long time. Then he sent a single order to every fleet commander in the Concorde. Emergency session. Mandatory attendance. No exceptions. The Rough Hand limped into Concorde space, looking like a ship that had been chewed up and spit out. The hull was scarred with dents and impact marks. 2 gun turrets hung limp and burned. Half the exterior armor plates were cracked or missing. The ship trailed a thin line of vapor from a coolant leak that the crew had not had time to fix. But the ship was flying. The crew was alive. And 11 Palanese survivors stood at the docking port, blinking in the bright lights of the station, barely able to believe they were safe. The emergency session convened in the Great Hall of the Concorde, the same chamber where Dr. Roamesi had been laughed at 2 weeks earlier. This time, nobody was laughing. 300 species sat in heavy silence as Ambassador Gello walked to the podium. Gello looked different. His bioluminescent skin, which usually glowed a confident blue, was dim and steady. He carried no notes. He did not need them. He played the footage without introduction. The hall watched the tungsten slug hit the hollow and tear it open. They watched the grape-shot canisters shred the creatures into dissolving fragments. They watched the Marines on Vera, 6, firing rifles, throwing grenades, fighting in close quarters with an enemy that had eaten worlds. They watched Tanaka's knife cut through a hollow like the blade was made for this exact purpose. When the footage ended, the hall was so quiet that Gello could hear his own heartbeat. Admiral Ush asked for his assessment. Gello, the ambassador who had boarded the Rough Hand expecting to document a failure, who had called the weapons theory caveman logic, who had sent a farewell message to his family because he did not expect to survive, stood before 300 species and gave the most important report of his career. He said the humans were never primitive. He said the Concorde was over-specialized. Every species in the Alliance had spent thousands of years building weapons to fight each other. Energy against energy, field against field, technology against technology. They had climbed so high up the ladder of advancement that they forgot what the ground looked like. The Hollow exploited that blind spot perfectly. They were immune to everything advanced and vulnerable to everything simple. The humans never stopped carrying iron. They never abandoned kinetic weapons. They never looked at a metal slug and decided it was beneath them. Not because they were stupid, because they were practical. They kept what worked. They improved it, refined it, built better versions of it, but they never threw it away. And that stubbornness, that refusal to abandon the basics, turned out to be the only thing standing between the galaxy and extinction. Gello said one more thing. He said that when the Concorde sent the Rough Hand into the Vera system, it sent them as a disposable experiment, a sacrifice. And instead of dying, the humans fought their way through a kill zone, proved the theory, killed the unkillable, rescued 11 people, and flew home. Not because they were ordered to rescue anyone, because they refused to leave people behind. The vote was unanimous. The Concord restructured its entire military doctrine around human kinetic weapons technology. Human engineers were brought in to design new accelerator cannons, new fragmentation systems, new ammunition types for Concord warships. Assembly lines that had not produced a physical projectile in 10,000 years were retooled to manufacture tungsten slugs and grapeshot canisters. Human drill instructors were assigned to Concord ground forces to teach close-quarters combat. For the first time in galactic history, the most advanced civilizations in existence were asking the youngest, smallest, most underestimated species in the Alliance to teach them how to fight. Captain Okoro was asked to address the Concord. She walked to the same podium where Roa Messi had been mocked and stood before 300 species that had spent centuries looking down on her people. She was still wearing her ship jacket. There was still engine grease under her fingernails. She did not give a long speech. She said, "You built weapons to be elegant. We built weapons to work. Elegance is a luxury. Survival is not." She paused. "You are welcome." She walked off the podium. The Hollow War was far from over. The enemy was vast, spread across dozens of systems, and growing. But for the first time since the war began, the galaxy had a weapon that made contact. A weapon that drew blood. A weapon that worked. And it came from a species everyone had written off as too primitive to matter.